Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Respected listeners, Alhamdulillah alladhi wakafa wa salatu wa salamu ala man la nabiyya ba'dah amma ba'd. Respected listeners, Alhamdulillah, this is the fifth session of the reading of Irshad al-Muluk, a book which is the translation and commentary on certain chapters of al-Risala Makkiyah by Shaykh Qutbuddin al-Dimashqi rahmatullah alayh. The translation, the commentaries by Imam Rabbani, Qutb al-Irshad, Imam Rabbani, Mawlana Rashid Ahmad Gangohi rahmatullah alayh. In this particular section, which is towards the end of the first chapter of this particular book, Mawlana Gangohi rahmatullah alayh, he mentions Wusul ilallah ka matlab, the meaning of reaching or joining Allah Almighty. And he says, Garz Salik ko sabse awal ilm hasil karna zaruri hai. Continue with the theme that's been continuing in previous lessons and in the previous pages. He says that the purpose is that the Salik, the person traversing the path, should first of all acquire, it's necessary that they acquire the necessary ilm, the necessary knowledge. Taaki apne aqaid wa amal ki durust kare, so that he may correct his aqidah and his beliefs and his a'mal and his actions. Or bidayat tariqat wa suluk ki ibtida sahih ho, and by acquiring knowledge to rectify and correct his aqidah and also his actions, the beginning of his tasawwuf and the beginning of his tasawwuf and the beginning of his tariqat will become correct. Or wusul ilallah ke laik ban jawe, and that he creates the ability to reach Allah Almighty, or to acquire the status of wusul ilallah. And then after this, Imam Rabbani, Mawlana Rashid Ahmad Gangohi rahmatullah alayhi, he explains what wisal and ittisal actually means. And it's very important that he actually explains these terminologies. Why? Because historically, the critics of Sufism, the critics of Tasawwuf, and at the end of the day, our Mashaykh and our ulama follow a type of Tasawwuf, follow a type of Sufism that's ingrained and embedded within the Shariat. Knowledge and the ilm of the Quran, the ilm of the Hadith, the ilm of the Fuqaha and the accepted schools of Aqidah is something that's threaded through the Tasawwuf of our Mashaykh, and authentic Tasawwuf. But certain times what happens is that you have certain words, certain terminology which is misinterpreted by those that have very little familiarity with the particular science. And it happens, and it's happened many times, that the word wusul or joining, sometimes that word in itself has a literal meaning. Wasala means to join one thing with another. When you meet a person, you've joined the person, you've met the person. Wasal, you physically met the person and you've joined with the person. You might pour water into a glass of milk, it's joined and it's become one. And that's the literal meaning of the word wasala, which is the root of it is from wusul. But there's also a metaphor. And it's the metaphoric meaning that's intended within Tasawwuf, that the veils from the heart are removed to such an extent that one has the presence of mind that Allah Almighty is watching him all the time. And this is indicated in the hadith of Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam, narrated by Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu and Hazrat Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu in Bukhari and also in Muslim, where Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam asked Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, very famous hadith, asked Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Mal ihsan, what is ihsan? And Prophet sallallahu replied, An ta'bud Allah kannaka tarahu, fa in lam takun tarahu, fa innahu yarak. That you worship Allah as if kannaka tarahu, as if you are seeing him. And if that state is not possible, then you should visualize that Allah Almighty is seeing you. And that's what wusul ilallah actually means. So Mawlana Gangohi rahmatullah alayhi, as I said before, al-Risala Makkiyah, it was the original Arabic book which Mawlana Gangohi rahmatullah translated certain chapters from it, and he also at sporadic places added his own commentary, own explanation of certain things. So this particular section here is something, and I took the liberty of comparing this with the original Arabic. I managed to find a copy, a PDF online. I compared this part with the original Arabic, And this, what we find here is actually not included in Arabic, so I'm presuming this is the commentary of Mawlana Gangohi rahmatullahi alayhi himself. And he says, or विसाल व इत्तिसाल मा सिवल्लाह से मुनक़ति हो जना का नाम है. And he explains what wisal actually means in the correct, authentic way. And he says that wisal and joining and ittisal, joining, actually is the name of inqita from ma siwallah. It means to, when you disjoin yourself and disconnect yourself from that apart from Allah Almighty, all the dunya, everything. This is what wisal and ittisal actually means. और विसाल का अदना मर्तबा ये है, and the lowest level of विसाल according to the Sufis is कि क़ल्ब का हिजाब उठा देने के बाद, that once the veils have been removed from the heart, महबूबी हकीकी का जमाल दिल की आंखों से मुशाहदा करने लगे, that the beauty of the real mahbub, the real beloved, yani Allah Almighty, is witnessed from the eyes of the heart. अगरचे दूर से हो, even though it's from a distance. इसके बाद हिम्मत के मुवाफिक मुशाहिदा के दवाम की बदौलत तरक्की होती रहेगी. And then according to how much yearnings or how much ability one actually has, the prolonging and the perpetuality of seeing and witnessing Allah Almighty with the eye of the heart, in this feeling one shall start progressing bit by bit. Or wisal ke baad buland maqamat, and then once wisal takes place, then one starts reaching the loftier stations. Yani uns or bast वगैरह तक जा पहुंचेंगे. That a person will be able to reach the spiritual states of uns, which is intimacy with Allah Almighty, that the heart becomes permeated by the love and contemplates the beauty of Allah Almighty. So one reaches these higher levels such as this. At the same time, he then mentions that bust, and bust actually means an expansion or an involuntary state of expansion within the state of unveiling, which engulfs the heart with joy and love that's connected to Allah Almighty. So that once one reaches the state of wisal and wusul, even though it's at a distance, the one starts progressing bit by bit to a state that he starts reaching the loftier stations such as uns, intimacy with Allah Almighty, and bust, the involuntary state of expansion, where the heart feels joy and love when in its connection to Allah Almighty. जनाब रसूलुल्लाह सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने एक बार अबू ज़र रज़ियल्लाहु ताला अन्हु सहाबी से फरमाया, then Imam Qutub al-Irshad, Imam Rabbani, Zubdatul Fuqaha, Ra'isul Muhaddithin, the Murabbius Salikin, he says that once Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he mentioned to Sayyidina Abu Zar radiallahu ta'ala, the companion, he says, "Hey Abu Zar, oh Abu Zar, jante bhi ho, do you even know कि जो मुसलमान बंदा अपने मुसलमान भाई की ज़ियारत को घर से निकलता है, that when a Muslim leaves his house to visit another Muslim, हक़ ताला के 70,000 फरिश्ते इसके पीछे चलते हैं, that 70,000 angels of Allah Almighty follow him, और सब के सब उसके लिए खुदा से मग़फ़िरत मांगते हैं. Each of them seek forgiveness for this particular individual from Allah Almighty, और यो दुआ करते हैं, and they supplicate in this way कि इलाही, oh my Lord, जिस तरह इस बंदे ने ख़ास तेरे लिए तेरी राह में मुआसरत इख्तियार की है, that in the way that this slave of yours has specifically in your path, in your way, chosen to reach out, और महज इस्लाम की वजह से एक मुसलमान से मिलने को निकल खड़ा, and solely on account of Islam in itself, he's come out to meet a fellow Muslim, तो तू भी उस बंदा को अपने वासिल बना ले, then you also make this person your wasil. The wasil is the it's the wasil is a word that's derived from the masdar, from the root word wasal, joining, and it's the it's the subject of the verb. It's the subject form of the verb of the root word wusul. Yani make this person your wasil, the joiner, one who connects to yourself. Then Mawlana Gangohi rahmatullah alayhi mentions, बस इस हदीस से विसाल खुदा ताला की का सबूत मिल गया. From this hadith you understand that the usage of the word wisal, the usage of the word wusul, or joining Allah Almighty can be established, its understanding can be established from this hadith. और बंदा हक ताला में विसाल के बस यही माना है, और बंदा व हक ताला में विसाल के बस यही माना है. And then he mentions that the wisal and the wusul and the joining with Allah Almighty, between the slave and the Almighty, the meaning is only this and nothing more. It's not a physical joining with Allah Almighty. It's not an incarnation of the slave with Allah Almighty, and that's completely not the case. और बंदा व हक ताला में विसाल के बस यही माना है कि गैर खुदा ताला से इनकिता हासिल हो. That and the joining between the slave is in the metaphorical sense. The joining between the slave and Allah Almighty is in this context and in this meaning, that one disconnects from anything aside from Allah Almighty. कि हक ताला शानहु में महवियत हो जाए, that one becomes annihilated in his thought and his feelings for Allah Almighty. Everything else becomes regardless, everything else becomes secondary. Na jaisa ke baaz mulhidun ne samajhe. Then Mawlana Gangohi rahmatullah alayh, he then mentions the corrupt beliefs of some of the heretics who've understood from this, have understood wusul ilallah to mean something totally different. और दुनिया की दो चीज़ों के बाहम मिल जाने पर खुदा ताला बंदा के इत्तिसाल को कियास करके मुर्तद बन गए. That some of the heretics, they took the literal sense in that they assumed and they assumed that the wusul ilallah actually is similar to the way that inside the world or in the worldly life one thing joins another physically, and this joining is what is referred to by the Sufis here. Mawlana Gangohi rahmatullah says that this is ilhad, and by having this belief one has actually apostated or left the fold of Islam, and this is not the correct belief. The correct belief is that the veils from one's heart are removed, and one sees and views and has the understanding and the realization of the marifat of Allah Almighty, that one's connected to Allah Almighty continuously, and then from there he starts progressing to the other loftier stations, and then he does some refutation, and he explains that the heretics have taken this to be the literal meaning. This is incorrect. तो खुदाए पनाह में रखे इत्तिसाल हक को ऐसा समझना कुफर है. Then Mawlana Gangohi rahmatullah alayhi mentions, then खुदाए पनाह में रखे, खुदा पनाह में रखे, may Allah Almighty keep us in His refuge. इत्तिसाल हक को ऐसा समझना कुफर है. To consider, to understand, to think that the joining with Allah Almighty in this physical way, in this literal way, is kufr in itself, is disbelief. बस बात यह है कि जिस कदर माँ सिवा Allah से दूरी होगी. And then he says that hence the issue is, in summary, that the way one is able to disassociate and grow distant from that which is aside from Allah Almighty, उसी कदर हक ताला का कुर्ब हासिल होगा. So in that way one will be able to draw closer and closer to Allah Almighty. So as you disassociate yourself and you become slightly aloof from what is aside from Allah Almighty, as you progress in that, then slowly your distance and proximity to Allah, your proximity to Allah Almighty increases. The distance to Allah Almighty decreases, that one's closer to Allah Almighty. और जितना गैर खुदा से इनकिता होगा इतना ही मर्तबा वसल में उरूज होगा. And as one is able to disassociate themselves from that which is aside from Allah, in the same way one will be able to reach the pinnacle of joining and reaching Allah Almighty. And this particular issue of Sufi terminology being misunderstood is something that's happened many times. And a quick search on YouTube, a quick search on the internet, and you'll often find armchair critics of tasawwuf who've got very little understanding of the path in itself, coming out with comments which are totally incorrect. They take the literal meaning, and you can easily find these people. And for the benefit of those people, I just thought I'd also share an excerpt from the book by Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawzi rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the students of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. In his book, he writes in his book Madarijus Salikin. Madarijus Salikin, volume 3, page 151 in the Arabic version. and this particular book is on tasawwuf. It's actually a commentary by Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayh of Sheikh Abdullah al-Hirawi rahmatullah alayh's book on tasawwuf called Manazilus Sa'irin. And Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayh, he says, and I'm going to read it out to you, be completely aware of ambiguous, obscure words that are in the terminology of the Sufis or the community, al-Qawm, which he refers to as the Sufis. So he says, be aware of ambiguous and obscure words found in the terminology of the community, i.e. the Sufis. They are indeed the root of difficulties and the source of both the Siddiq and the heretic. That you have these terminologies, and the difficulties that people come across these are the roots of those difficulties, and it's from them that you find that some people become Siddiq. They understand the context. They realize, and then other people, they take the literal meaning and they become heretics. When a person who is weak in recognizing and knowing Allah Almighty Most High hears the word ittisal, union, infisal, separation, musamara, conversing, mukalama, communion. So a person who's not really treaded the path, he's not understood tasawwuf, he's taken his understanding of suluk and tasawwuf hasn't reached that level. When he comes across terminology like this, like ittisal, etc., and then what happens is that he misunderstands it, and he hears that which fills the ears, and he starts thinking that these people believe in hulul, which is incarnation, that Allah Almighty enters one's body, ittihad, unification in the physical sense, shatahad, words of ecstasy. However, the arifs, those people who have marifah, those people who have understood tasawwuf, etc., on the other hand, they use these words and others like them, they intend the correct inherent meaning, but some err or make a mistake in understanding what they mean, and then they attribute heresy and kufr to them. So Shaykh Ibn Qayyim al-Jawzi rahmatullah alayhi Madarij Salikin, he's also touched on this topic of clarifying what the terminology of the Sufis actually is. That brings us to the end of today's reading. Inshallah, we'll carry on next week. Alhamdulillah, we've covered quite a lot of ground so far. Allah give us tawfiq to finish the entire book, inshallah ta'ala. And just as I finish, just like to say that, may Allah Almighty also give us all the ability to become wasil Allah and reach Allah Almighty. Life is very short. Only today we heard about a brother, Hafiz Faisal, age 42, who just passed away. May Allah Almighty forgive all of his sins, raise his rank, make his qabr a garden from the gardens of paradise, and inshallah Allah Almighty also give sabr to his family and his kids, make them the coolness of the entire family's eyes in the best way, and inshallah look after them and do the tarbiyah. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanaka Allah wa bihamdik, la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.